I still remember the sound of the engine. Smooth, powerful, almost silent. The dealer had spent 20 minutes just showing me how the doors worked, like he was introducing me to royalty. "It's the pinnacle of automotive luxury," he'd said, running his hand along the dashboard. "The Rolls Royce Phantom, not just a car, but a statement. A statement. That's exactly what I wanted to make." After decades of trying to please my father, of being the invisible daughter, I thought this would finally be the gesture that made him see me. That made him proud. Growing up as the only daughter with 3 brothers in our family wasn't easy. My brothers, Michael, James, and David, were always the stars of the show. Michael followed in our father's footsteps as a surgeon. James became his business partner in medical equipment sales. And David, the youngest, was the golden child who could do no wrong, even when he dropped out of 3 different colleges before eventually taking over Dad's real estate investments. Then there was me. I worked twice as hard, graduated at the top of my class, built my own tech company from nothing, and somehow still remained in the shadows of my brother's mediocre accomplishments. "Eleanor, why do you always have to try so hard?" my mother would ask whenever I mentioned my father's indifference. "Your father loves all his children equally." But the evidence suggested otherwise. At family dinners, he'd talk about my boys and their latest achievements while barely acknowledging my presence. During holidays, my brothers would receive thoughtful gifts while I'd get generic gift cards or, worse, something my mother had obviously picked out last minute. For years, I told myself it didn't matter. I built my company, Nexus Technologies, from a startup to a multi-million-dollar enterprise. I earned respect in my industry. I made my own way. But there was always that little girl inside me, desperately wanting her father's approval. When Dad's 75th birthday approached, I saw my opportunity. He had always been obsessed with luxury cars, particularly Rolls Royces. He would clip magazine articles about them, watch documentaries featuring them, and point them out whenever we saw one on the road. Yet, despite his considerable wealth, he had never bought one for himself, always saying it was too extravagant or unnecessary. "What do you think about getting Dad something special this year?" I asked my mother during one of our rare phone conversations. "Something he's always wanted, but would never buy for himself?" There was a pause on the line. "Like what, dear?" "A Rolls Royce." The silence that followed told me everything. "Eleanor, that's excessive. Your father doesn't need such extravagance. Why don't you get him a nice watch instead? Or maybe contribute to the group gift your brothers are organizing?" Of course. The group gift. Every year, my brothers would pool their resources for a joint present, something they knew Dad would appreciate. Golf clubs, expensive scotch, weekend trips, and every year, they'd conveniently forget to include me in the planning. "What are they getting him?" I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. "I'm not entirely sure," my mother replied. "Something about renovating his study, new furniture, bookshelves, that sort of thing." "And they didn't think to ask if I wanted to contribute?" Another pause. "I'm sure they meant to, Eleanor. They've just been so busy." "Too busy to send a text message? Too busy to make a quick call?" I didn't believe it for a second, but I also knew there was no point arguing. This was the dynamic in our family. My brothers were insiders, and I was perpetually on the outside looking in. "Well, I think I'll get him something on my own this year," I said firmly. "Something special. Just don't go overboard, dear. You know how your father feels about showing off? Showing off?" That was rich coming from the man who insisted on living in a mansion with more bathrooms than people, who wore custom-made suits to the grocery store, and who had his initials monogrammed on everything from his handkerchiefs to his golf clubs. But extravagance was only showing off when it came from me, apparently. I hung up the phone and made my decision. If I was going to be excluded yet again, I might as well make it count. I would give my father something so spectacular that he couldn't possibly ignore it, or me, any longer. The process of buying a Rolls Royce Phantom wasn't simple. There were meetings with dealers, customization options to consider, financing to arrange. I opted for a classic silver exterior with a navy blue interior, Dad's favorite colors. I added custom touches like his initials subtly embroidered on the headrests and a built-in humidor for his cigars. The final price tag made even me, a successful CEO, take a deep breath. $497,000, nearly $500,000 to buy my father's love. When I thought about it that way, it seemed pathetic. But I pushed those thoughts aside. This wasn't about buying love. It was about making a gesture so grand that he would finally have to acknowledge me. The day before the party, the dealer delivered the car to my home. It sat in my driveway like a gleaming sculpture, impossibly elegant and imposing. I ran my fingers along its perfect paint job and tried to imagine my father's face when he saw it. He'll be speechless, I told myself. For once in his life, he'll look at me with the same pride he shows the boys. Dad's birthday party was being held at my parents' estate, a sprawling property in the wealthiest part of town. My mother had hired event planners, caterers, and a small orchestra. The guest list included about 100 people: family, friends, colleagues, and business associates. It was, like everything in my parents' world, designed to impress. I arranged for a driver to follow me to the party in my own car so he could drive the Rolls Royce back to my place afterward. I didn't want to presume that Dad would want to drive it home that night, especially after drinking at his party. As I drove to my parents' house with the Rolls Royce following behind, my stomach churned with a mix of excitement and anxiety. What if this grand gesture backfired? What if it just reinforced the family narrative that I was desperate for attention, that I was trying too hard? Stop it, I told myself firmly. This is a thoughtful gift for a milestone birthday. There's nothing desperate about it. I pulled up to the security gate at my parents' estate and gave my name to the guard. He checked his list, nodded, and opened the gate. I drove through, the Rolls Royce following close behind. Several luxury cars were already parked in the circular driveway. Bentleys, Mercedes, BMWs, the vehicles of choice for my parents' wealthy friends. I parked my car off to the side and signaled for the driver to keep the Rolls Royce out of sight for now. I wanted the reveal to be a surprise, timed perfectly for maximum impact. The driver nodded and pulled around to the service entrance at the back of the property. Taking a deep breath, I smoothed down the front of my designer dress, a midnight blue number that had cost more than some people's monthly rent, and headed inside. The party was already in full swing, the sound of conversation and laughter spilling out from the open French doors that led to the backyard. My mother spotted me first, waving from across the garden where she stood with a group of her friends. She was immaculately dressed as always, not a hair out of place, her jewelry catching the afternoon sunlight. "Eleanor, darling, you're late," she said as I approached, air-kissing my cheeks. "Your father's been asking where you were." I doubted that very much, but I smiled anyway. "Traffic was terrible. Where's the birthday boy?" Mom gestured toward the pool area. "Over there with your brothers. They just gave him their gift. You should have seen his face. They completely renovated his home office while he was away on that golf trip last week. New desk, bookshelves, everything. He was absolutely thrilled." Of course he was. My brothers could have given him a pair of socks, and he would have acted like they'd handed him the moon. "That's wonderful," I said, not meaning it at all. "I'll go say hello." I made my way through the crowd, accepting a glass of champagne from a passing waiter. Several people stopped me to chat, mostly business acquaintances of my father's who knew of my success in the tech industry and wanted to bend my ear about investment opportunities or partnerships. Finally, I reached the pool area where my father held court. At 75, Robert Harrison was still an imposing figure, tall, broad-shouldered, with a full head of silver hair and the confident posture of a man accustomed to commanding respect. He wore an expensive suit despite the casual nature of the garden party, because God forbid Robert Harrison dress down even for his own birthday. My brothers surrounded him like satellites orbiting a planet, laughing too loudly at his jokes, nodding earnestly at his pronouncements. They were all cut from the same cloth, tall, conventionally handsome, dressed in clothes that screamed old money rather than new success. Dad saw me approaching and raised a hand in greeting, but his smile didn't quite reach his eyes. Ah, the busy executive finally finds time for her old man. My brothers snickered, and I felt my cheeks flush. Always the dig, always the subtle reminder that my work, my successful, groundbreaking work, was somehow less important than whatever they did. "Happy birthday, Dad," I said, leaning in to kiss his cheek. He smelled of expensive cologne and the cigars he wasn't supposed to be smoking anymore. I wouldn't miss it. "Your brothers were just telling me about their gift," he said, gesturing to a photo album open on the table beside him. It showed before and after pictures of his office renovation. Completely surprised me. Didn't even suspect they were up to something. "It looks amazing," I said, glancing at the photos. The renovation was nice, but hardly spectacular. A new desk, some built-in shelving, a fresh coat of paint. Yet Dad was acting like they'd built him the Taj Mahal. "We know how much time you spend in there," Michael said, clapping Dad on the shoulder. "Thought you deserved a proper workspace." "The contractor was a nightmare," James added, "but we made it happen just in time." David, the youngest, just grinned. "Wait till you see the hidden compartment in the desk for your Scotch collection." Dad laughed and shook his head. "You boys think of everything." I stood there, invisible again despite being right in front of them. The familiar feeling of being an outsider in my own family washed over me, but I pushed it aside. Today would be different. Today, I had the ultimate trump card. "I have something for you too, Dad," I said, interrupting their mutual admiration society. Dad looked at me with mild surprise, as if he'd forgotten I was still standing there. "Oh, you didn't need to get me anything, Eleanor. Just having all my children here is gift enough." The platitude rang hollow, especially given how he'd just been fawning over my brother's present. "Actually, it's outside," I said, trying to keep my voice casual. "When you have a moment, I'd like to show you." My brothers exchanged glances, curiosity, and perhaps a tinge of concern on their faces. They weren't used to me stealing their thunder. "Well, now I'm intrigued," Dad said, setting down his drink. "Let's see this mysterious gift." My heart pounded as I led him through the crowd, my brothers trailing behind us like a pack of curious wolves. Mom noticed our procession and hurried to join, bringing along several guests who sensed something interesting was about to happen. I'd texted the driver to bring the Rolls Royce around to the front, and as we stepped outside onto the main driveway, there it was, gleaming in the afternoon sun, impossibly elegant and undeniably impressive. The driver stood beside it, holding the keys on a small silver tray. A collective gasp went up from the assembled guests. Even in this wealthy crowd, a brand new phantom was something to behold. "What's this?" Dad asked, his voice oddly flat. I took the keys from the tray and held them out to him, a smile fixed on my face. "Happy birthday, Dad. It's yours." The silence that followed seemed to stretch for an eternity. Dad stared at the car, then at the keys in my outstretched hand, his expression unreadable. "A Rolls Royce?" he finally said, making no move to take the keys. "You bought me a Rolls Royce?" "A Phantom," I clarified, my smile beginning to falter. "You've always loved them. Remember how you used to point them out whenever we'd see one on the road?" I thought, "I don't want any of this!" His shout cut through the air like a thunderclap, so sudden and harsh that several guests flinched. I stood frozen, the keys still dangling from my fingers. "Dad," I began, but he wasn't finished. "What were you thinking?" he demanded, his face flushing red. $500,000 on a car? For what? To show off? To make some kind of point? The guests around us had gone deathly quiet. From the corner of my eye, I could see my brothers smirking, exchanging knowing glances that said, "Typical Eleanor, always trying too hard." "I thought you'd like it," I said, my voice small now. "You've always talked about them." "Talked about them, yes. Admired them from a distance. That doesn't mean I want one parked in my driveway for the whole neighborhood to gawk at." He ran a hand through his silver hair, visibly agitated. "This is exactly the kind of excessive attention-seeking behavior that—" "Robert," my mother interrupted, placing a hand on his arm. "Perhaps we should discuss this privately." But Dad was on a roll now, his audience captive. "No, Catherine, I think this needs to be said. Eleanor has always had this need to outdo everyone, to be the center of attention. Even as a little girl, always showing off, always needing to be the special one." Each word was a knife twisting in my gut. I stood there, keys still in hand, humiliation washing over me in waves as relatives, friends, and business associates watched my father dress me down like a child. "I was just trying to give you something special," I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. "Special?" he scoffed. There's nothing special about throwing money around. Your brother's gift, that took thought, consideration. They actually know me, what I value. This, he gestured dismissively at the Rolls Royce. This is just vulgar. Vulgar. The word hung in the air between us. I felt something shift inside me, a final thread snapping. For years, decades, I had chased this man's approval, contorted myself into shapes trying to earn his love, and all he could see was a spoiled little girl making a scene. I see, I said quietly, closing my fingers around the keys. Well, I apologize for the misunderstanding. I turned to the driver, who looked profoundly uncomfortable. Please take it back to my house. Eleanor, my mother started, her voice placating. Your father didn't mean… Yes, he did, I interrupted, surprising even myself with the steel in my voice. He meant every word, and you know what? That's fine. It's actually perfect. I turned back to my father, something new in my posture now, a straightness to my spine, a lift to my chin. For 38 years, I have tried to earn your love. I've achieved more success than anyone in this family, built something from nothing, and yet nothing I do is ever enough. I'm always too much or not enough, too flashy or too boring, too ambitious or not ambitious enough in the right ways. Dad's eyes widened slightly. I had never spoken to him like this before. No one had. The car was a mistake, I continued, but not for the reasons you think. It was a mistake because I was still trying to buy something that should have been freely given. Your love, your respect, your pride in me as your daughter. My brothers had stopped smirking now, exchanging uncomfortable glances as the party guests shifted awkwardly, unsure where to look. Eleanor, this isn't the time or place, Dad said, his voice low with warning. When is the time, Dad? When has there ever been a time when I wasn't an afterthought in this family? When my achievements weren't dismissed or diminished? When I wasn't made to feel like an outsider among my own blood? The silence that followed was deafening. Mom looked on the verge of tears. My brothers studied the ground as if the answers to the universe were written in the expensive paving stones. And Dad looked genuinely stunned, as if seeing me for the first time. I took a deep breath, suddenly feeling lighter than I had in years. I think I'll skip the rest of the party. Enjoy your birthday, Dad, and enjoy the office renovation. It really does look nice. With that, I turned and walked to my car, head high despite the tears threatening to spill down my cheeks. I could feel every eye on me, could practically hear the whispers that would start the moment I was out of earshot. Eleanor Harrison, making a scene again. Poor Robert and Catherine, having to deal with such a difficult daughter. But as I slid behind the wheel of my car, I realized I didn't care anymore. For the first time in my life, I was seeing the situation clearly. It was never about the gift, not the Rolls Royce, not any of the other expensive presents I'd bought over the years trying to win his approval. It was about a fundamental truth I had been running from. My father was incapable of giving me what I needed most. As I drove away from my parents' estate, I felt something breaking inside me. Not like something was being destroyed, but like something was finally breaking free. The crushing weight of decades of trying to earn conditional love was lifting, and beneath it, I could sense the first fragile shoots of something new. Self-acceptance. The understanding that I didn't need his approval to be whole. I was halfway home when my phone started ringing. Mom, then Michael, then Dad himself. I let them all go to voicemail. Whatever they had to say could wait. Right now, I needed silence, space to process the seismic shift that had just occurred in my life. When I got home, I saw the Rolls Royce already parked in my driveway, a $500,000 monument to misplaced hope. I should have felt embarrassed, foolish for such an extravagant mistake. Instead, I felt oddly at peace as I walked past it and into my house. I kicked off my heels, poured myself a generous glass of wine, and curled up on my sofa, finally letting the tears come. Not tears of humiliation or anger, though there was plenty to be angry about. These were tears of release, of letting go. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. Your father is very upset. Please call us. Of course he was upset. His carefully maintained image of the perfect family patriarch had been challenged, publicly no less. For perhaps the first time in his life, someone, his own daughter, had held up a mirror and made him see himself as he truly was. Not the generous, loving father he pretended to be, but a man who played favorites, who withheld love as a form of control, who could never see past his own narrow expectations. I didn't respond to the text. Instead, I opened my laptop and began looking up luxury car dealers. The Rolls Royce would have to go, not because it was vulgar, as Dad had claimed, but because it represented a chapter of my life I was now closing. The chapter where I desperately sought validation from people incapable of giving it. The next morning, I woke up feeling different. Lighter somehow, as if I'd set down a heavy burden I'd been carrying for too long. I made coffee, sat on my patio, and watched the early morning light play across the silver contours of the Rolls Royce. In the harsh light of day, I could see my father's reaction for what it truly was, not a rejection of an extravagant gift, but a rejection of me daring to step out of the role he had assigned me in the family drama. My phone had been buzzing nonstop since I'd left the party. Messages from my mother begging me to call, texts from my brothers ranging from concerned to condescending, and even a few messages from family friends checking if I was okay. Dad himself had called once more but left no voicemail. I wasn't ready to talk to any of them yet. Instead, I called my assistant and asked her to clear my schedule for the day. Then I called the Rolls Royce dealer to arrange for the car to be picked up. "Is there something wrong with the vehicle, Ms. Harrison?" the dealer asked, confusion evident in his voice. "Not at all," I replied. "It's a beautiful car. It's just not needed anymore." I spent the day at home, doing something I hadn't done in years. Absolutely nothing. No work calls, no emails, no family drama. I read a book I'd been meaning to get to for months, ordered takeout, and even took a nap in the middle of the afternoon. Small acts of self-care that felt revolutionary after a lifetime of striving, of trying to prove my worth. By evening, my phone had finally stopped its constant buzzing. Either they'd given up or decided to give me space. Both possibilities were fine with me. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across my living room, I finally felt ready to listen to the voicemails. I poured another glass of wine and settled onto the couch, preparing myself for the guilt trips, the recriminations, maybe even a half-hearted apology or two. Mom's message was predictably focused on smoothing things over. "Eleanor, darling, please call us back. Your father didn't mean to upset you. You know how he gets when he's surprised. The party just wasn't the right setting for such an extravagant gift. Please, let's talk about this as a family." Michael, the eldest and always Dad's most loyal defender. "Sis, you need to call Mom. Dad feels terrible about what happened, but you have to admit, a Rolls Royce? What were you thinking? Anyway, call them. They're worried." James, the peacemaker. "Hey, Al, rough day yesterday. Look, we all say things we don't mean sometimes. Why don't you come over for dinner next week? Sarah would love to see you and the kids miss their aunt." David, the youngest, surprisingly the most direct. "Elle, that was intense. Dad was way out of line and I told him so. Call me if you want to talk. Or don't. But I'm here if you need me." And finally, Dad. His message was brief, his voice gruff. "Eleanor, call me back." No apology, no acknowledgement of his behavior. Just an expectation that I would do as I was told, as I always had before. I deleted the messages one by one. Then I blocked their numbers. Not permanently, just for now. I needed time and space to think, to figure out what kind of relationship I wanted with my family moving forward, if any at all. As I sat there in the growing darkness of my living room, I thought about the little girl I had once been, eager to please, desperate for approval, convinced that if she just worked hard enough, achieved enough, her father would finally see her. And I thought about the woman I had become, successful, respected in her field, yet still chasing that same elusive validation. It was time to let that little girl go, to acknowledge that she had done everything she could, that the failure wasn't hers, but her father's. His inability to love unconditionally wasn't a reflection of my worth, but of his limitations. Tomorrow, the Rolls Royce would be gone. I'd return to my company, to the world I had built for myself, separate from my family's influence or approval. but I would be returning as someone new, someone who no longer needed external validation to know her own worth. In that quiet moment of clarity, I realized something profound. The greatest gift I had ever received wasn't anything my father had given me, but what he had finally allowed me to see. That I was enough, just as I was, without his approval or anyone else's. And that knowledge was worth far more than any Rolls Royce could ever be. 3 weeks passed before I unblocked my family's numbers. During that time, I threw myself into work, finding comfort in the predictable challenges of running my company. At Nexus Technologies, I wasn't difficult Eleanor, or the daughter who tries too hard. I was the founder and CEO, respected for my vision and leadership. The Rolls Royce had been returned to the dealer, who was surprisingly understanding after I explained the situation in vague terms. Family dynamics can be complicated, he'd said diplomatically as he arranged for the car to be picked up. We'll handle everything discreetly. I took a significant loss on the return, but the financial hit felt like a small price to pay for the clarity I'd gained. Some lessons are expensive, and this one had cost me almost $500,000. But as I signed the paperwork finalizing the return, I couldn't help but feel it was worth every penny. The first family member to breach my self-imposed isolation was, surprisingly, David. My youngest brother showed up at my office unannounced one Thursday afternoon, charming his way past my assistant with the easy confidence that had always made things so effortless for him. "Nice digs," he said, looking around my corner office with its floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. "Very impressive, Ellie." I hadn't heard that childhood nickname in years. It caught me off guard, momentarily softening the walls I'd built up. "What are you doing here, David?" I asked, setting aside the quarterly reports I'd been reviewing. He dropped into the chair across from my desk, looking uncharacteristically serious. "Checking on my big sister. You disappeared on us." "I needed some space." 3 weeks of space, he pointed out. No calls, no texts. Mom's beside herself, you know. I felt a twinge of guilt, quickly followed by annoyance. "Is that why you're here? To guilt me into calling Mom?" David shook his head. "Actually, I'm here because I owe you an apology." That was unexpected. In our family, apologies were rarer than Rolls Royces. "What for?" I asked cautiously. He shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "For laughing. When Dad, you know, at the party." It was a knee-jerk reaction. I knew it was wrong as soon as I did it. I studied my brother's face, looking for signs of the manipulation I'd grown accustomed to in my family. But all I saw was genuine remorse. "Why did you laugh?" I asked, the question that had been burning in me since that day. David sighed, running a hand through his hair, a gesture so like our father's that it momentarily took me aback. Honestly, relief. Relief that for once, Dad's disappointment was aimed at someone else. He looked up, meeting my eyes. "That sounds terrible, doesn't it?" "It sounds honest," I replied, "and familiar." A silence fell between us, not uncomfortable but weighted with shared understanding. For the first time, I wondered if my brothers felt the same pressure I did, the constant need to measure up to our father's impossible standards. Maybe they just hid it better, or maybe they'd found ways to meet those standards that I never could. "He was wrong, you know," David said finally. "The car was an incredible gift. Thoughtful, generous, but I think it scared him." "Scared him? Dad?" The concept seemed absurd. Robert Harrison wasn't afraid of anything, or anyone. Think about it, Ellie. You gave him something he's always wanted but would never buy for himself. Something extravagant, yes, but also something deeply meaningful. And you did it not to show off, but because you know him. Maybe better than he realizes. David leaned forward. "Plus, you're the only one of us who could afford to give a gift like that. That's got to be intimidating for a man like Dad." I'd never considered that perspective before. In all my years of trying to win my father's approval, I'd never thought that my success might actually be threatening to him. "Has he said anything about what happened?" I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. "Not directly. You know, Dad, he doesn't do emotional conversations. but he's been different, quieter. Mom says he's been looking at old photo albums, ones with you in them, from when you were little. I didn't know what to make of that information. Was my father genuinely reflecting on our relationship, or was this just another manipulation tactic being relayed through David? I'm not ready to talk to him yet, I said firmly. I get that. I'm not here to pressure you. David stood up, seeming to sense that our conversation was drawing to a close. Just wanted to check that you're okay, and to let you know that, well, I see you, Ellie. I always have. Something about those simple words, I see you, struck a chord deep within me. Isn't that what I'd been wanting all along? Not just from my father, but from my entire family? To be seen, truly seen, for who I was. Thanks for coming, David, I said, surprised to find I meant it. After he left, I sat at my desk for a long time, staring out at the city skyline as the afternoon sun cast long shadows between the buildings. David's visit had unsettled me, cracking open the protective shell I'd been building around myself since the birthday party incident. I wasn't ready to forgive my father, not yet. But I was beginning to see that the situation was more complex than I'd allowed myself to believe. My family wasn't a collection of villains conspiring against me. They were flawed people, just as I was, all of us trapped in patterns established decades ago. That evening, I did something I hadn't done since the blow-up. I called my mother. Eleanor, her voice was cautious, as if she feared I might hang up at any moment. Darling, is that really you? It's me, Mom. Oh, thank goodness. We've been so worried. Are you all right? Where have you been? I've been at home, at work. I needed some time. Of course, of course. She paused, and I could almost see her choosing her words carefully. David said he saw you today, that you looked well. I am well, I said, surprising myself with how true it felt. Better than I've been in a long time, actually. That's good to hear. Another pause. Your father wants to speak with you. I felt my guard rising immediately. Mom? Not now, she clarified quickly. He knows you need space, but when you're ready, he has things he wants to say. Does one of those things happen to be, I'm sorry? I couldn't keep the edge from my voice. My mother sighed. Eleanor, you know your father. He's complicated. He doesn't express himself well when it comes to emotions. But what happened at the party, it affected him. More than you might think. I wanted to believe her. Part of me, the little girl who still desperately wanted her father's love, was already making excuses for him, ready to rush back into the same dysfunctional pattern. But the woman I had become in these past weeks knew better. I'll think about it, I said finally. That's all I can promise right now. That's all we're asking, darling. Just don't disappear again. Even if you're angry with us, let us know you're okay. I will, I promised, feeling a complicated mix of emotions. Good night, Mom. After hanging up, I poured myself a glass of wine and stepped out onto my balcony. The night was warm, the city lights twinkling below like earthbound stars. For the first time in my adult life, I felt truly in control of my relationship with my family. Not because I was cutting them off, but because I was finally setting boundaries, deciding what I would and wouldn't accept. The next day at work, I found myself distracted, my mind returning again and again to thoughts of my father. What did he want to say to me? Was he truly reflecting on his behavior, or was this just another manipulation to pull me back into the family fold without addressing the real issues? By lunchtime, I'd made a decision. I called my assistant into my office. Claire, I need you to clear my schedule for tomorrow afternoon. She nodded, already making notes on her tablet. May I ask what for? I'm going to visit my father. The words felt strange in my mouth, laden with both apprehension and resolve. I wasn't going to seek his approval or forgiveness. I was going to listen to what he had to say, and then I would decide, with clear eyes and a full heart, what kind of relationship I wanted with him moving forward. The next day, I drove to my parents' estate with a calm I hadn't expected to feel. The mansion looked the same as always, imposing, perfectly maintained, a monument to success and status. But somehow it seemed smaller now, less intimidating. The housekeeper who answered the door seemed surprised to see me, but quickly recovered her professional demeanor. "Miss Eleanor, we weren't expecting you. Your parents are in the garden." "Thank you, Margaret. I know the way." I found them sitting in the shade of the large oak tree that dominated the center of the garden. My mother was reading, my father working on a crossword puzzle, a picture of domestic tranquility that felt at odds with the turmoil of our last encounter. Mom saw me first, her eyes widening in surprise and then relief. "Eleanor!" She set down her book and stood, arms outstretched. Dad looked up more slowly, his expression guarded as he watched me approach. He looked older somehow, more fragile than he had just weeks ago at his birthday party. "I didn't know you were coming," Mom said, embracing me briefly before pulling back to study my face. "You look well." "I am well," I replied, my eyes meeting my father's over her shoulder. "Hello, Dad." He nodded, setting aside his crossword. "Eleanor?" Mom glanced between us, clearly sensing the tension. "I'll get some iced tea," she said, retreating toward the house with transparent haste. Left alone with my father, I took a seat in the chair my mother had vacated. Neither of us spoke for a moment, the only sounds the distant chirping of birds and the soft rustle of leaves overhead. "You've been avoiding us," he said finally. "I needed time to think," I replied evenly, "to process what happened." He nodded, his fingers tapping a restless rhythm on the armrest of his chair. "Your mother said you returned the car?" "Yes." That was an expensive mistake. I felt a flare of irritation. Of course he would focus on the financial aspect. "It was worth it." He looked at me sharply. "Worth losing $500,000? "Worth learning where I stand with you," I replied. "Worth finally seeing the truth of our relationship." Dad's expression shifted, something like pain flickering across his features before he masked it with his usual stoic demeanor. "And what truth is that?" "That nothing I do will ever be enough. That you've never seen me, really seen me, as my own person. That I've spent my entire life chasing your approval, and you've spent yours moving the goalposts." The words came out more calmly than I'd expected, not in anger, but as simple statements of fact. My father didn't immediately respond, his gaze shifting to the garden beyond us, as if searching for something there. "You think I don't see you?" he asked finally, his voice oddly quiet. "I've always seen you, Eleanor. Perhaps too clearly." "Oh, what does that mean?" He sighed, suddenly looking every one of his 75 years. "You were always different from your brothers, stronger, more independent. From the time you were small, you had this fire in you, this determination." He paused, still not looking at me. "You reminded me of myself. I hadn't expected that." "I don't understand." "I was hard on you because I saw in you the same drive, the same ambition that I had at your age. I thought..." He broke off, shaking his head. "I thought I was pushing you to be your best self, to be stronger than your brothers, because you would need to be in this world. By making me feel invisible? By treating me like I was less than them?" "I never meant to make you feel less," he said, finally turning to look at me. "I meant to make you unstoppable." I stared at him, trying to reconcile this explanation with decades of feeling overlooked and undervalued. "That's a convenient rewrite of history, Dad. It's the truth," he insisted. Or at least it's how I justified it to myself. Looking back now, he trailed off, his gaze dropping to his hands. "I can see that I failed you." Those words, so unexpected from my proud, unyielding father, left me momentarily speechless. In all my years, I had never heard Robert Harrison admit failure at anything. "The car," he continued, his voice rougher now. "It was a magnificent gift, thoughtful, generous. But when I saw it there in the driveway, all I could think was that you had succeeded where I had always held back. That you had achieved more, become more than I ever was. And instead of feeling proud, I felt threatened. Threatened? By a car? By what it represented. Your success, your confidence, your ability to do something I never allowed myself to do. He looked up at me, his eyes surprisingly vulnerable. I've spent my life bound by rules and expectations, never showing off, never indulging, always maintaining the proper image. And there you were, my daughter, bold enough to do what I never could. I sat back, trying to process this revelation. All these years I had thought my father viewed me as a disappointment, as less than my brothers. But what if the truth was almost the opposite? What if he saw in me something that both impressed and frightened him, a version of himself unbound by the constraints he had always lived within? "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked, still wary of accepting this new narrative too readily. "Because I almost lost you," he said simply. "And because at 75 I'm finally old enough to admit when I'm wrong." He hesitated, then added quietly, "I'm sorry, Eleanor. For what I said at the party, for all the times I made you feel less than the extraordinary woman you are." Coming from anyone else, these words might have seemed rehearsed, calculated. But from my father, a man who had never in my memory admitted to being wrong about anything, they carried a weight that broke through the walls I had built around my heart. "I don't know what to say," I admitted. "You don't need to say anything," he replied. "Just don't give up on your old man yet. I may be slow to learn, but I'm not beyond changing." Mom returned then, carrying a tray with glasses of iced tea. She looked between us anxiously, clearly trying to gauge the emotional temperature. "Everything all right out here?" she asked, setting down the tray. "We're getting there," I said, accepting a glass from her with a small smile. We sat together in the garden for nearly 2 hours, talking more openly than we had in years, perhaps ever. There were difficult moments, old wounds that couldn't be healed in a single conversation. But there was also something new emerging, a foundation for a different kind of relationship, one built on mutual respect, rather than a desperate need for approval. As I drove home that evening, I felt lighter yet also more grounded. The conversation with my father hadn't erased the past, or magically fixed all our issues, but it had cracked open a door I had thought permanently closed, letting in a sliver of light and possibility. The next day, I received a text from my father, the first he had ever sent me, as he generally dismissed texting as impersonal nonsense. It read simply, "Thank you for coming yesterday. Lunch next week?" I smiled at the message, recognizing it for what it was, a small step, an outstretched hand. I replied, "I'd like that. Tuesday?" His response came surprisingly quickly. "Tuesday it is. Just us." Just us. 2 simple words that nonetheless felt significant. Not a family gathering where I would once again feel like an outsider, but a deliberate one-on-one meeting between father and daughter, an acknowledgement that our relationship deserved attention and care on its own terms. Over the next few weeks, a new pattern emerged. Tuesday lunches with my father became a regular occurrence, sometimes comfortable, sometimes challenging, but always honest in a way our interactions had never been before. We were learning to see each other as we truly were, not as the roles we had assigned each other in our family drama. One Tuesday, about 2 months after the birthday party incident, Dad surprised me by suggesting we take a drive after lunch. "Where to?" I asked as we left the restaurant. "You'll see," he replied, a hint of mystery in his voice that was so uncharacteristic it made me smile. He directed me to drive to a sleek, modern building on the outskirts of the city. As we pulled into the parking lot, I realized it was the headquarters of the foundation he had established years ago, ostensibly a family charity, though in practice it had always been his pet project, with minimal input from the rest of us. "What are we doing here?" I asked as we walked toward the entrance. "There's someone I want you to meet," he replied, holding the door open for me. Inside, we were greeted warmly by the staff, who clearly knew my father well. He led me to a conference room where a young woman was waiting, laptop open in front of her. "Eleanor, this is Jessica Chen, our new program director," Dad said. "Jessica, my daughter Eleanor Harrison." Jessica stood to shake my hand, her smile warm and professional. It's a pleasure to meet you, Ms. Harrison. Your father speaks very highly of you. I glanced at Dad, surprised. Does he? Absolutely. In fact, your work at Nexus Technologies has been something of an inspiration for our new direction. New direction? Dad gestured for us to sit. That's why I brought you here today. I want to show you what we've been working on. For the next hour, Jessica and my father walked me through the Foundation's new initiative, a technology incubator program focused on supporting women and minority entrepreneurs in the tech sector. They had established mentorship programs, funding opportunities, and educational resources aimed at addressing the systemic barriers these groups faced in the industry. We've been developing this for the past 6 weeks, Dad explained, watching my face carefully. I wanted it to be ready before I showed you. 6 weeks, right after our conversation in the garden. As I looked through their materials, the thoughtful program design, the comprehensive support structures, the emphasis on long-term sustainability rather than quick wins, I realized this wasn't a hasty attempt to impress me. This was something my father had put real thought and resources into. This is impressive, I said, genuinely moved. But why the focus on tech? The Foundation has always been more centered on education and healthcare. Dad exchanged a glance with Jessica. I'll give you two a moment, she said tactfully, gathering her materials and stepping out of the room. When we were alone, Dad turned to me. I've been thinking a lot about what you said, about not seeing you, about moving the goalposts. He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. I realized that while I've been proud of your success, I've never really acknowledged it properly, never really engaged with what you've built. I waited, sensing there was more. This program, he continued, is my way of trying to understand your world better, to support the kind of work you do, the kind of change you're trying to create in your industry. He looked at me directly now, his gaze steady. And it's a way for me to say that I see you, Eleanor. I see what you've accomplished, and I admire it more than I've ever been able to express. In that moment, I felt something shift between us, the final piece falling into place in the new foundation we were building. Not a dramatic Hollywood reconciliation with tears and embraces, but something quieter and more enduring. Mutual respect, genuine recognition, the beginning of a relationship between equals. Thank you, I said simply, knowing he would understand all that those two words contained. As we left the foundation building together, walking side by side in the afternoon sunlight, I thought about the journey that had brought us here. From the humiliation of the birthday party to this moment of quiet understanding, it hadn't been easy or straightforward. There had been pain and anger, difficult conversations and uncomfortable truths. But standing next to my father now, I felt a peace I had never expected to find with him. Not because he had suddenly become perfect or because all our issues were resolved, but because we were finally seeing each other clearly. And in that clear vision, we had found something worth preserving and rebuilding. Not the relationship I had always craved as a child, but something new and potentially stronger, a relationship based on who we actually were, not who we had always expected each other to be. The Foundation's Technology Incubator program launched 3 months later with a gala that brought together leaders from across the tech industry. As one of the keynote speakers, I looked out at the audience, industry colleagues, Foundation supporters, and in the front row, my family. Innovation thrives where diverse perspectives are valued, I concluded my speech. Where barriers are dismantled and potential is nurtured regardless of background. This initiative represents not just an investment in technologies, but in the people who will shape our future. I'm grateful to the Harrison Foundation, especially its founder, my father, for recognizing this need and addressing it so comprehensively. The applause was warm as I stepped away from the podium. Dad rose to take my place, squeezing my hand briefly as we passed. A silent, well done, that meant more than any effusive praise might have. At the reception, Michael approached with champagne in hand. My relationship with my oldest brother had been the slowest to evolve following the birthday incident. Dad's made quite a pivot with this program, he observed, very different from his usual approach. Change isn't always bad, I replied carefully. He nodded. You changed him, you know. I've never seen him question himself the way he did after that day. He hesitated. I owe you an apology, Eleanor, for not standing up for you, for going along with the family dynamic because it was easier. This vulnerability from Michael, so like our father in his usual stoicism, caught me off guard. Why now? I asked. He glanced at our father across the room. Because I'm starting to understand what real strength looks like. It's not about never changing. It's about having the courage to grow, even when growth is uncomfortable. His eyes met mine. You showed that courage at the party. Dad's showing it now. And I'm trying to follow your example. Later that evening, I found myself on the venue's terrace, taking a moment of quiet. The city lights spread out below like earthbound stars. I heard footsteps and turned to see my father approaching, his bow tie loosened in a rare display of informality. Quite a success tonight, he said, joining me at the railing. It was. You should be proud. I am, though I can't take most of the credit. He looked out at the skyline. Without your influence, this would have been just another conventional program. Your insight made it truly innovative. We stood in comfortable silence before he spoke again. I've been thinking about getting a new car. I glanced at him, surprised. Oh? A Bentley, actually. Not quite as ostentatious as a Rolls Royce, but still significant. A small smile played at his lips. I laughed softly, recognizing this for what it was, not just a statement about a car, but an acknowledgement of how far we'd come. A Bentley would suit you. I thought perhaps you might help me choose it, he said, his tone tentative in a way that was still new between us. I'd like that, I replied, feeling a warmth that had nothing to do with the evening air. He nodded. Eleanor, I want you to know, I am proud of you, not just of what you've accomplished, though that's considerable, but of who you are, your strength, your integrity. He paused. I always have been, even when I couldn't show it properly. 6 months ago, these words would have been all I ever wanted. Now, they were meaningful in a different way, not as validation I desperately needed, but as confirmation of our new understanding. Thank you, Dad, I said simply. That means a lot. Later that week, as Dad and I toured the Bentley showroom together, I watched him examine each model with careful consideration. The wall of formality between us hadn't disappeared entirely, but it had lowered enough to allow for genuine connection. I've been thinking about what you said that day, he said unexpectedly, about how nothing you did was ever enough. He ran his hand along a car's flawless paint. I did the same thing in my own life, set impossible standards, then moved them the moment I got close. That must have been exhausting, I said, seeing him in a new light. It was. Still is sometimes. He paused. But I'm learning. From you, actually. You found a way to be ambitious without being driven by insecurity, to achieve remarkable things without letting those achievements define your worth. As we drove through the city in the sleek Bentley, I thought about our journey these past months. It hadn't been easy. There had been difficult conversations, painful recognitions, moments when old patterns threatened to reassert themselves. But we had persevered, both committed to building something new from the ashes of what had burned away at his birthday party. And that was perhaps the most valuable lesson of all, that relationships can transform, that patterns established over decades can be broken, that it's never too late to see each other clearly and begin again. The desperate need for his approval that had driven me for so long had been replaced by something healthier. Mutual respect, honest communication, the recognition of each other's humanity with all its flaws and strengths. I think this is the one, he said as we returned to the dealership. I think it's perfect, I replied. And it was, not just the car, but the moment, the understanding between us, the future we were building together. As we walked back into the showroom, Dad placed a hand briefly on my shoulder, a gesture that would have once meant the world to me. Now, it was simply nice. A touch of connection between two people finally learning to see and accept each other as they truly were. The Rolls Royce that had caused such turmoil was long gone, but what it had given me was beyond price. In trying to buy my father's love with that extravagant gift, I had instead found something far more valuable: the courage to stop trying to buy love at all. To recognize that true love, from others or from oneself, couldn't be purchased or earned. It could only be freely given and freely received. The car had cost me $500,000, but the freedom I had gained in return, that was priceless.